There are museums on Earth that weren't built by anyone. They have no ticket counters, no guided tours, and no opening hours. And most people walk above them every day without realizing it. Their exhibitions are hidden in places that seem quiet, empty, and untouched. On the surface, only seemingly lifeless ice and stone. But in reality, this is an archive of life. It preserves different chapters of Earth's history. Ice has preserved the tissues and DNA of ancient animals for eternity. Amber has captured the smallest details, even dinosaur feathers that are 100 million years old. Caves have sustained communities that have lived for ages without oxygen or sunlight. And tar has mercilessly engulfed the bodies of ancient monsters and preserved their skeletons for thousands of years. Today, we'll uncover the secrets of these discoveries to see the world as it was before we even existed. Ancient Earth Findings. This air is not meant for us. It is foreign, ancient. Dinosaurs once breathed it, and it has been sealed in amber for over 100 million years. Scientists have studied these tiny bubbles and discovered that the oxygen level was 35% at the time, almost twice as high as it is today. Thanks to this oxygen-rich air, the Earth back then was filled with predators the size of buses and insects with wings large enough to block out the sun. Amber has preserved more than just the ancient air. Its golden depths have trapped creatures that lived millions of years ago. What are the strangest things ever discovered in amber? The most fascinating fossils found in amber. Let's start with an incredible discovery, an exceptionally well-preserved fossil. It's a tiny prehistoric lizard that was found in Kaliningrad, Russia. This species was previously unknown to science. Researchers named it Yantaro gecko balticus, after the Baltic amber that encased it. The lizard became trapped in amber during the Eocene epoch, approximately 54 to 34 million years ago. The gecko's front half, including part of a limb and the toe pads, is perfectly preserved, while the torso and tail are completely missing. The entire fossil is only 0.6 inches long. You can see its short snout, a bulging forehead, and a 0.01 inch ear hole. The eyes measure 0.05 inches in diameter, and they are open. Yes, Yantaro gecko had no eyelids. Instead, there was a transparent protective film. To clean its eyes from dirt, it simply licked them with its tongue, a behavior still seen in modern geckos today. The lizard's body was sturdy, covered in dense scales, but the most fascinating aspect was the limbs. Despite the gecko's tiny size, they were strong, with short toes and adhesive pads. These features made the lizard a natural climber, able to deftly scale trees, cling to bark, and even move along vertical surfaces. Previously, it was thought that geckos developed such abilities later. Thus, the specimen was initially classified as a geckonoid, an ancient relative of modern geckos. But how did only half of the lizard end up in amber? Where is the back half? The explanation is quite simple. Most likely, the lizard crawled too close to the sticky resin and couldn't escape in time. As a result, its front part was sealed in the sap, while the rear remained outside and eventually decomposed. You can see this remarkable specimen with your own eyes. The gecko is kept in the German Amber Museum in Ribnitz Domgarten. But if you think this is the coolest thing found in amber, wait until you see what's coming next. How about a dinosaur tail? Yes, you heard that right. But if you're imagining a massive block of amber, think again. This tail is tiny, only 1.5 inches long, and more than 99 million years old. It too was trapped in resin. Now, thanks to this fossil, the mystery of what dinosaurs actually looked like has been unveiled. But do you know how it was found? Nope, not during an excavation. In 2015, Chinese paleontologist Jing Lida spotted an unusual piece of amber at a market in Myanmar among piles of ordinary trinkets. At first, he thought it contained an ancient plant, but it turned out to be a real sensation. The tail consisted of 8 vertebrae, and it was covered in feathers. Indeed, this discovery also showed that some dinosaur species had plumage. Analysis revealed that the upper part of the tail was chestnut-colored, while the underside was white. The feathers lacked a central shaft like those of modern birds, but they did have barbules that formed a downy structure. Scientists believe the tail belonged to a young Coelurosauur, a group of dinosaurs that includes tyrannosaurs and modern birds. If anyone still doubted that birds evolved from dinosaurs, these ancient feathers in amber erased all uncertainty. But that's not all. Traces of iron, a product of hemoglobin decay, were also preserved inside the stone. This discovery could help researchers determine the color of the dinosaur's feathers and understand more about the structure of its keratin. However, it won't be possible to clone the dinosaur. Like in Jurassic Park, DNA completely breaks down in amber after 1 to 1.5 million years, and this tail is 99 million years old. Interestingly, an ant from the Cretaceous period was also found in the same piece of amber, a double jackpot. Today, this incredible fossil is preserved at the Dashu Institute of Paleontology in China, where scientists continue studying it to uncover more about ancient mammals. Yes, time is ruthless, but not when it comes to amber. It has the power to capture even the tiniest details, turning a fleeting moment into eternity. This was the case with a tiny predatory bird that found itself trapped in resin 127 million years ago. In 2017, paleontologists discovered a piece of amber from Myanmar containing an incredibly detailed fossilized skeleton of an ancient bird inside. It was less than 1.97 inches tall. Scientists were able to study the entire specimen, including its head, spine, and even soft tissues. They later reconstructed it in 3D. The bird belonged to the Enantiornithes group, a lineage of feathered creatures that dominated the Cretaceous period. It was a tiny hatchling, resembling a cross between a sparrow and a lizard. Moreover, it was feathered right after hatching and may have been independent from the first moments of life, much like some modern birds. And here's something even more surprising. It had teeth right inside its beak. Unlike modern birds, this ancient chick had sharp teeth and claws on its wings. The Enantiornithes lived in forest environments. This species was very common and could be found everywhere. However, despite their numbers, they did not survive the catastrophe 66 million years ago. When the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs hit Earth, it caused somewhat of a nuclear winter. Forests burned, plant eaters perished, and predators had nothing left to eat. As the woodland habitats of Enantiornithes vanished, so did the species itself. Only the birds capable of adapting to open landscapes survived. Those who could walk on the ground, dig for food, and endure the chaos of the post-impact world. However, not all fossil discoveries provide clear answers. Sometimes, what seems like a groundbreaking revelation at first turns out to be something entirely different over time. This is exactly what happened with one of the fossils discovered in Burmese amber. In 2020, the world was stunned by the announcement of the smallest dinosaur ever found. More precisely, it was identified as a member of the Avialiclade, or broadly speaking, birds. The specimen was named Oculodentavis congri, and the find became a true sensation. The skull of the specimen was the size of a hummingbird, around 0.6 inches. It had an elongated skull, large eyes, and long teeth. It seemed to be an ancient relative of modern birds, But then, something didn't quite add up. Questions arose. The skull's structure did not match any known species of dinosaurs. A team of researchers, led by Chinese paleontologist Wei Wang from the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology, decided to study the find deeper. After a detailed bone analysis, they suddenly discovered it was neither a dinosaur nor a bird. Why did they come to this conclusion? The creature had scales instead of skin, unlike birds. Also, its teeth were attached directly to the jawbone rather than sitting in sockets like those of dinosaurs. Its eye structure and shoulder bones closely resembled those of lizards. A specific skull bone shape was found only in scaled reptiles. Thus, the dinosaur bird suddenly turned out to be a lizard. Later, another specimen of Oculodentavis was found, this time with a spine, soft tissues, and even preserved skin. When scientists scanned it, they were astonished. Oculodentavis represented an entirely unknown group of scaled reptiles. But why was the first find initially mistaken for a bird? It was all due to deformation. The first specimen's skull was compressed, making it look like a beak. However, the second specimen had a different shape and did not resemble a bird at all. Despite this dramatic misidentification, Oculodentavis remains a mystery. Its structure is so unique that scientists still struggle to place it on the evolutionary tree. It does not resemble any known lizard species. Could it be, perhaps, a completely new branch of reptilian evolution? The next discovery left no room for doubt. In the mines of the Dominican Republic, scientists found a chunk of amber containing a fossilized flea. At first glance, nothing unusual, right? Such fossils are quite common. But let's take a closer look. The discovered flea measured 0.2 inches. It was well preserved, and researchers were able to examine the specimen in detail. And they were in for a big surprise. Traces of bacteria were found on its proboscis and in its intestines. These bacteria resembled Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium that caused the bubonic plague, which wiped out a third of Europe's population in the 14th century. Previously, scientists believed Yersinia pestis originated around 5,000 years ago. But this discovery pushed that timeline back by millions of years. The age of the amber from these deposits is estimated to be 15 to 45 million years old. Incidentally, ancient mites with bacteria similar to the agents of Lyme disease had previously been found in Burmese amber. Such discoveries could completely change our understanding of mass extinctions. We tend to think that dinosaurs and many other animals disappeared due to meteorite impacts or volcanic eruptions. But what if viruses and bacteria were the real cause? Diseases might have played a role in mass extinctions. After all, the plague could have spread not only among mammals, but among ancient reptiles as well. Scientists are now working to determine whether this fossilized bacterium is truly an ancestor of modern Yersinia pestis. If confirmed, this would bring a great discovery. The plague might not just be a medieval epidemic, but an ancient killer that has been stalking living beings since time immemorial. Yes, all life is locked in an endless struggle for survival. And while the threat was a barely visible bacterium in case of the flea, the next discovery reveals a much more tangible danger, with razor-sharp jaws and lightning-fast reflexes. Scientists have discovered an astonishing scene frozen in time 98 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. A piece of Burmese amber captured a prehistoric ant, 0.2 inches in size, attacking a beetle larva in a dramatic mid-hunt pose. The species was given the name Lingua myrmex vladi. Why Vladi? It's a tribute to Vlad the Impaler, better known as Dracula. And it's not a joke. Its anatomy is pure vampirism, and soon you'll see why. The most terrifying feature of this ancient ant is its horn, long, sharp, and reinforced with metal particles. Is there another insect that carries such a metallic weapon? Some modern beetles strengthen their mandibles with zinc or iron, but ants? Never. It's as if evolution specifically equipped this species with perfect gear for brutal combat. These ants developed a completely unique, vertically oriented mouthpart. Unlike anything we know, they were not ancestors of today's ants, but rather a separate evolutionary offshoot that became extinct a long time ago. And now, the main question. How did it hunt? Unlike modern ants, which bite and tear their prey apart, this one used a completely different method. Its jaws functioned like a bear trap. When a victim touched the sensitive hairs on its mandibles, snap! The toothed jaws would instantly slam shut. The ant would then pierce its victim with its horn, and the hemolymph would flow down grooves in its jaws directly into its mouth. But here's another mystery. Was the horn meant for killing or just for immobilizing? Perhaps the ant didn't suck blood, but held its prey to later drag it to the nest. Scientists still don't have a definitive answer. Yes, some animals did not survive natural disasters and climate change, but other species managed to endure. Their appearance may have changed slightly, but their essence remains the same. Today, we can observe their descendants, and thanks to amber, we can see exactly what they looked like millions of years ago. You can see a 99-million-year-old piece of Burmese amber where scientists have discovered the remains of 4 ancient frogs. The specimens have a body length of 0.79 inches. The new species has been named Electorana limoe. At first glance, a frog may not seem as exciting as a dinosaur, but this find turned out to be a true sensation. The fact is that ancient amphibians are poorly studied. For example, frogs appeared on Earth 200 million years ago. Yet their fossils are extremely rare. Their delicate bodies are hardly ever preserved. But amber provided a unique window into the world of the Cretaceous period. The Electorana limoe fossils were not completely intact. Scientists were able to identify a skull with teeth, front limbs, part of the spine, and a hind limb. Using CT scans, they revealed fascinating details. This species closely resembled modern fire-bellied toads. They once lived in the hot, humid forests of the Cretaceous period. Today, their descendants live in a temperate climate. Inside this same piece of amber, researchers also found plant fragments and even the remains of a beetle. Perhaps this was the frog's last meal before being trapped in resin. Yes, this is not the first time we have seen such a scene sealed in this time capsule. But sometimes, amber preserves deeply touching, even dramatic moments from ancient history. Imagine finding yourself 99 million years ago in the Cretaceous period. Prehistoric jungles stretch endlessly, giant dinosaurs roam, and unknown creatures thrive. A spider sits motionless on the bark of a tree, but then something goes wrong, and it finds itself in thick resin. A moment later, the spider is trapped. Millions of years later, in a Burmese amber deposit in Myanmar, scientists discover the fossil and study it closely. It turns out that the stone contains a female spider of the extinct family Lagonomygopidae, but she is not alone. The mother spider is holding her egg sac, and her tiny hatchlings are by her side. It appears as if she was trying to protect and save them. A short time later, another fossil of the same species was discovered. This time, a cluster of tiny spiderlings who remained close to their mother after birth. Using CT scans, researchers studied the finest details: the mother spider's eyes, the structure of her body, and that of the hatchlings. They also confirmed that the specimens indeed belonged to the extinct family Lagonomygopidae. These ancient spiders resembled modern jumping spiders. The extinct species was about 0.2 inches in size. They had large front-facing eyes, which were equipped with a special reflective layer called tapetum. What is that? In short, it's a special layer of the eye's vascular coating that enhances night vision. Remember how cats' eyes glow at night? Well, these spiders had a similar feature. No traces of web were found in the discovered species. Most likely, they were nocturnal hunters who did not spin webs but stalked their prey. Nevertheless, the species has not survived to our time. Nature took its course. At the same time, some creatures were so well adapted that they have barely changed in hundreds of millions of years. Yes, that's possible. Scientists have found proof. Ancient mites preserved in Triassic period amber. They were discovered in the Dolomite Alps in Italy. After extensive research, scientists confirmed that the amber is over 230 million years old. Just imagine! The find suggests these arthropods were just around 0.08 inches large. And here's the strangest part. These ancient mites look almost identical to their modern relatives. They belong to the Eriophioidea superfamily, which today includes around 3,500 species. All of them feed on plants and sometimes cause distinctive plant deformations called galls. Scientists are convinced that their ancient ancestors did the same. But the fact that these mites have barely evolved is truly shocking. Think about it. They survived the dinosaurs, ice ages, and mass extinctions. And yet, they remain unchanged. Long segmented body, tiny claws, special mouthparts to feed on plants. All these key features were already there in the Triassic. The only noticeable difference? They had only 2 pairs of legs, unlike most modern mites, which have 4 pairs. How is this possible? What evolutionary mechanism allowed these creatures to remain virtually unchanged for hundreds of millions of years? Perhaps they had already found the perfect survival strategy back then. And finally, here's one more mystery. Is it possible to find a 99 million year old flower? The answer is yes. And this is not a joke. 2 ancient flowers were discovered in Burmese amber. They were named Eophilitza priscatellata and Philitza pyloburmensis. Interestingly, their modern relatives, Philitza flowers, still grow in South Africa today. Why is this discovery unique? Simply put, flowers almost never fossilize. They wilt quickly or turn into fruits, leaving behind almost no trace in the fossil record. But thanks to amber, these 2 specimens were preserved in astonishing detail. Burnt plant residues were also found in the same stone. This suggests that forest fires raged during those times. What does this tell us about these flowers? Modern Philica flowers also grow in fire-prone environments. Their seeds can withstand extreme temperatures, and their leaves are designed to protect the flowers from damage. This means that 99 million years ago, their ancient ancestors already had the same superpowers. But of course, not all ancient stories are sealed in amber. Some are locked inside something far colder, where time doesn't just slow down, but stops completely. More than 10% of our planet has a permanent ice sheet. In Antarctica alone, it covers an area of 14 million square kilometers, with an average thickness of more than 2 kilometers. And this is not just water. It's like a real archive that has been collected for thousands of years, holding in its depths the stories of the distant past. But what will happen if even a small part of the ice melts? What secrets can emerge from these depths? What awaits us? Or who? Yes, ice holds secrets that we did not even think of. And today, you will learn about the most amazing finds in ice that have already turned upside down our understanding of the Earth's past. Ten fascinating finds in permafrost. We're heading here. No, this isn't where The Lord of the Rings was filmed, though it does look similar. This is the Altai Republic in Russia, at the heart of Siberia. The natural beauty of this region is breathtaking, no doubt. But don't get too mesmerized. We wouldn't recommend getting lost here. The Republic is the size of Portugal or the state of Maine in the USA. But here, there's only one single city. The rest are settlements scattered amidst endless, dense forests and mountains. This is also a land of legends and mystical secrets. One such secret was uncovered here in 1993. It would later be called one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. It was also given a name, or rather names, the Siberian Ice Maiden, or the Princess of Ukok. But that came later. Initially, it was just the mummified body of an unknown ancient woman discovered in a kurgan, a man-made burial mound on the Ukok Plateau. Locals refer to this place as the second layer of heaven, as if it were a step above ordinary people with their ordinary lives. Archaeologists quickly realized that there was nothing ordinary here. The woman was laid to rest in a coffin carved from a single large tree trunk, 2.5 meters long, 8 feet long. No, she wasn't a giant. It's just that her 1-meter headdress required such an impressive sarcophagus. And that's where the amazing discoveries just began. This wasn't just a grave. It was a whole sarcophagus meticulously constructed from logs. The effort ancient people put into sending this woman on her final journey is reminiscent of the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs. The coffin was decorated with leather appliques depicting deer figures. Next to the coffin stood 2 wooden table trays, where ancient people had placed food and drink for the afterlife. On the tables were horse meat and mutton. In a wooden vessel with a carved handle and a stirrer, they found remnants of a dairy product, possibly something like yogurt. There was also a horn bowl with traces of an unknown drink. The body itself lay on its side, with the legs slightly drawn up. The mummy was dressed in a white silk blouse, a burgundy wool skirt, felt stockings, and a fur coat. What was considered a massive headdress was also the deceased's hairstyle, made from wool, felt, and her own hair. Her hands bore vibrant tattoos, as though they had been inked yesterday. The permafrost perfectly preserved them along with her skin. The tattooed fantastical creatures were astonishingly realistic and detailed. One image showed a creature resembling a deer with the beak of a griffin and flower-shaped antlers. And now, get ready to hear something shocking. 6 horses, fully equipped with saddles and harnesses, were buried alongside this woman. It's believed they were sacrificed and prepared to accompany this mysterious woman so she wouldn't have to travel to the afterlife on foot. Here's what it might have looked like 2,500 years ago. Of course, it's obvious that not everyone in the region received such an elaborate burial. Otherwise, horses might not have survived to this day as a species. The wealth of this burial strongly suggests that the woman was at least a priestess, if not a ruler, perhaps something akin to a princess. What we do know is that the Ice Maiden was a representative of the Pazyryk culture, a group of Iron Age nomads who thrived in the Siberian steppes between the 6th and 2nd centuries BC. The Pazyryks were pastoralists who bred horses, sheep, and cattle, and hunted extensively. They had connections with cultures from China, Persia, and other steppe peoples. Dendrochronologists analyzed samples from the logs of her tomb. Scientists also studied the organic matter from the horses' stomachs. It was determined that the Princess of Ukok was buried in the spring, likely in the 5th century BC. Further research revealed that she died relatively young, most likely between 25 and 28 years old. What happened to her? This remained a mystery for a long time, until researchers decided to examine the mummy using MRI. The results showed a definitive diagnosis. The princess suffered from an advanced stage of breast cancer. The cancer had metastasized throughout her body, even reaching her bones. This had long been suspected, as her weight was only about 45 kilograms at the time of death, despite her decent height of 165 to 170 centimeters. However, something didn't quite add up. Her body also had numerous fractures and dislocations. She had clearly fallen from a great height. We'll never know what exactly happened, but it's certain that the Princess of Ukuk was living out her final days weakened and in pain. Interestingly, the mummy was so remarkably preserved thanks to tomb raiders who looted such burial mounds. At some point, a more recent burial mound was made on top of the princess's tomb. This upper grave contained warriors and all sorts of intriguing artifacts. However, scientists found clear signs of vandalism in this later upper tomb. While pillaging the upper burial, looters unknowingly damaged the wooden structure above the princess's chamber, allowing meltwater to seep in. The water filled the tomb, the coffin, and the burial chamber, froze, and never thawed for over 2,400 years. Some prehistoric Lara Croft inadvertently turned the tomb into a frozen time capsule. Such a sad but fascinating story. But there's far more to it. Scientists compared the DNA of the Ice Maiden with that of modern Altai inhabitants and found significant differences. This led some archaeologists to hypothesize that the woman was of European descent. Forensic experts reconstructed her likely appearance. And here's the version by Italian artist Laura Livy. Let us know in the comments which version you trust more. In any case, as Natalia Polazmik, the excavation's lead archaeologist, aptly said, this mummy holds answers to questions we aren't even able to ask yet. Oh, if only we could bring this princess back to life and ask her ourselves. But then again, considering how such stories tend to end in Hollywood movies, perhaps it's best not to. Still, there was one case when scientists attempted to bring back someone who had been preserved in the permafrost for thousands of years. Let's find out what happened. We'll now head to Yakutia in the north of Russia, where something that shocked the scientific world was discovered in 2010. On the shores of the Laptev Sea, near the village of Yukagir in Russia's Yakutia region, local mammoth ivory hunters discovered something unusual in the permafrost. At first glance, it resembled a ledge protruding about 4 meters above the beach, nestled in a 5-meter cliff. It didn't take long to realize what this ledge actually was. A remarkably well-preserved body of a woolly mammoth calf. Now, you might think that scientists from all over the world immediately flocked to retrieve and study it. But no, the body lay right where it was found for another 2 years. Not because no one cared, but because it's incredibly hard to extract such a find without damaging anything. So the team prepared meticulously, not really worrying about what would happen with the carcass. After all, if this thing had already been thousands of years in the permafrost, it could wait there a little longer. Just imagine the body had lain in the permafrost for 39,000 years, like a time capsule. As soon as the scientists began their work, fascinating discoveries emerged, one after another. Clumps of the mammoth's fur were exceptionally well preserved, retaining their original reddish tint. Soft tissues remained. Well, soft, showing virtually no signs of decay. The calf was only 6 to 7 years old at the time of death, and it was a female. The height at the shoulders was 1.6 meters. Her body length from trunk to tail base was about 2 meters, and her tail was short, just about 9 centimeters. The mammoth calf likely weighed up to 550 kilograms. She was named Yuka, after the village of Yukagir where she was discovered. Her teeth and bones showed that she had been in prime health before meeting her tragic end. Scratch marks, bite wounds, and missing body parts told the rest of the story. She had been attacked by cave lions, but fought desperately to survive. The poor calf managed to escape into a muddy pit, where she eventually died from her wounds. Scavengers fed on parts of her body, but something scared them away. Then winter came. And then the last glacial maximum enveloped her body in the permafrost. And we can guess what many viewers might be thinking now, because we've been thinking it too. If this young mammoth is so well preserved, could her DNA be extracted and used for cloning? It would be wonderful to de-extinct an entire biological species, especially such a legendary one. For many, this sounds like something out of a childhood dream. And yes, some scientists even tried. In March 2019, a team of Japanese researchers, led by Kazu Yamagata, a biologist from Kindai University, worked with yucca's tissues. They extracted cellular structures resembling nuclei and stimulated them to perform basic biological processes. In simpler terms, there was something there that resembled life. However, they failed to activate cell division. Thus, it was impossible to spark real life. Perhaps that's for the best. Who knows if there would even be a place in our world for suddenly resurrected mammoths? We mentioned that yucca was hunted by cave lions. Indeed, they were skilled predators. They lived in groups, much like modern lions, and could hunt giants such as mammoths and bison. And they certainly wouldn't spare a little mammoth calf. Ironically, a couple of these ancient cats' cubs suffered the same fate as yucca. After all, karma works in mysterious ways. In 2017 and 2018, incredible discoveries were made in Yakutia. Perfectly preserved cave lion cubs. And when we say perfectly, we aren't really exaggerating. They were given simple and memorable names, Boris and Sparta. Boris was discovered first in 2017. Sparta was found a year later in 2018, just 15 meters away from Boris. These were just babies, only a few weeks old. At first glance, they might seem like siblings, or at least contemporaries, but that's not the case. Boris's remains were about 43,000 years old, while Sparta was about 15,000 years younger, about 28,000 years old. Their fur was so well preserved that it looked as though these cubs had been frolicking around just yesterday. Sparta even still had her whiskers. The cub's skin, teeth, claws, and even internal organs were remarkably intact. Sparta's lungs, liver, and part of her stomach were especially well preserved. The stomach contents revealed that the cubs died in the absence of any food sources. Genetic material extracted from their soft tissues confirmed they belonged to the species Panthera spilei. These lions were closely related to modern lions, but better adapted to glacial conditions. They had thicker fur, shorter tails, and smaller ears. They were also larger than today's lions. Interestingly, both Boris and Sparta died under similar conditions. It's believed that both cubs were caught in a landslide or trapped in a natural enclosure, possibly a cave where their parents had made dens. And this happened in the exact same spot, only 15,000 years apart. Scientists continue to study Boris and Sparta. They hope to sequence the full genome of Sparta, the most well-preserved cub. Then, cloning would really be just one step away. Now we'll move on to the next amazing discovery. But first, you need to brace yourselves, psychologically. No, there's no horror involved, but what you're about to learn in the next couple of minutes is something you should never, under any circumstances, try to replicate. It's incredibly dangerous. While it's unlikely you'll ever have such an option, we still feel the need to warn you. Now, let's get to it. From Russia, we now travel to the United States. Not too far though, to Alaska. Near the city of Fairbanks in 1979, gold miners stumbled upon one of the strangest and most astonishing finds: the frozen carcass of a steppe bison that had stayed in the permafrost for approximately 36,000 years. It was named Blue Babe, an ironic nod to the giant blue ox from the legend of Paul Bunyan. But the name wasn't entirely random. The frozen bison actually had a bluish tint. This was due to a chemical reaction between phosphates and iron in the soil that resulted in the formation of a mineral called vivianite. It was the substance that coated the animal's body with a thin blue layer. The carcass was so well preserved that at first glance, it looked like an animal that had only died recently. The hide, meat, and even some internal organs were remarkably intact. Scientists believe that this bison fell victim to a cave lion. Yes, our old acquaintances seem to have something to do with it. Only these were adults of a slightly different kind, Panthera leo-atrox. The bison's hide bore claw and bite marks. It appears the lion tore the bison's throat, but was scared off by something, leaving the carcass behind. The body was then quickly buried under sediment and frozen solid. The study of Blue Babe provided unique insights into the life and death of ancient animals during the last ice age. The frozen tissues allowed scientists to analyze the bison's diet, reconstruct its ecosystem, and gather data on climate temperatures and vegetation. Although interesting, this isn't such a big deal. The most famous part of Blue Babe's story relates not to paleontology, but to cooking. Yes, you heard that right. One of the researchers, paleontologist Dale Guthrie from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, had an idea to try the meat of this ancient animal. We'd like to believe that he was joking at first. Guthrie was quite the joker. But his colleagues turned out to be even more daring and said, why not? Here's a bit of backstory and some details. Gold miners stumbled upon the bison while using a water jet to thaw frozen ground. Realizing that the carcass would quickly defrost, they hurried to report the find to the nearby University of Alaska in Fairbanks. Fearing rapid decomposition, Dale Guthrie, then a professor and researcher at the university, decided to excavate Blue Babe immediately. However, this was no easy task in the permafrost. The scientist cut off the parts of the carcass that were already exposed, refroze them, and waited for the head and neck to thaw. When the carcass was finally fully excavated, researchers were amazed to find that the muscle tissue had retained a texture resembling beef jerky. In short, they decided not to cook a steak from the neck, but figured a vegetable stew with spices. Why not? The result? Nobody died. Guthrie later admitted, it tasted a little bit like what I would have expected, with a little bit of ring of mud, he said. But it wasn't that bad. Not so bad that we couldn't each have a bowl. Once again, don't try to replicate something like this. Not that you're likely to find a frozen bison carcass in your backyard, and chances are you don't live near permafrost, but you get the idea. Now, let's take a deep breath after this questionable experience and move on. Once again, we're heading back to Russia, and again to Yakutia. And once again, our unwitting assistants are mammoth ivory hunters. In 2020, they made a discovery in Yakutia that was another shocker for the scientific community. And where is this fearsome predator? Here it is. And yes, that tiny marker labeled 1 centimeter is the scale indicator. Okay, here's a 10-cent coin for comparison. No, we're not trolling you. What you see is an actual saber-toothed cat, the very one you've seen 100 times in illustrations. But here, it's a kitten just a few weeks old, and it died much like Boris and Sparta. However, this is a completely different story, and a much more fearsome predator had it been adult. The discovery is estimated to be about 35,000 years old, and is possibly the first specimen of this legendary species with such a preservation level. This tiny predator even retained its whiskers and claws. Its fur is in pristine condition, dense and thick, as if specially designed for surviving in glacial Siberia. This kitten has filled a significant gap in our understanding of the range and living conditions of ancient predators. But the biggest surprise came from DNA analysis. Instead of one of the more familiar species, this was identified as a representative of Homotherium latidens. a unique lineage of saber-toothed cats adapted to the harsh northern climates. Here's what they would have looked like as adults. Standing over 1 meter at the shoulder, with a length of up to 2 meters, excluding the tail, and weighing up to 200 kilograms, these predators were not the most saber-toothed among their kind, but they looked quite intimidating and had a fitting temperament. The anatomy of the cub gave insight into how their canines, those very sabers the cat used for hunting, developed. Homotherium had relatively short but thick saber-like serrated fangs, which set them apart from the long, slender teeth of smilodons. In the discovered cub, the teeth were just beginning to grow, allowing scientists to study this process in dynamics. Researchers plan to continue studying the mummy using the latest technologies. It's possible they will attempt to sequence its entire genome, and then, who knows? To see the next remarkable find, we'll fly where? Nowhere. We'll stay in Yakutia. It seems that this Russian region is a real treasure trove of permafrost discoveries. In 2018, a team of Russian and Japanese scientists uncovered something even more astonishing than the previous entries on our list. This was the carcass of an ancient steppe horse, later named the Lena horse, after the nearby Lena River. The find was estimated to be about 42,000 years old. The foal's body was discovered in the Batagaika crater, a gigantic natural pit called the Gateway to the Underworld by the locals. The preservation of the horse was near perfect. Fur, mane, hooves, internal organs, and most incredibly, liquid blood and urine were extracted from the mummified body. This is an incredibly rare and fortunate find. The foal was determined to have been only 2 months old at the time of death. It seems there are suspiciously many juveniles among these finds. The foal's body length was about 1 meter, comparable to modern horses of the same age. Its coat was light brown with whitish accents on the mane and legs. Even fine details, such as the ears, eyelashes, and nostrils, were remarkably well preserved. Analysis suggests the foal drowned in a muddy pit, which quickly froze, preserving its body in the permafrost. This not only prevented decomposition, but also kept its soft tissues in an astonishing state for its age. Most importantly, thanks to the liquid blood and other tissues, scientists were able to extract many intact fragments of the horse's DNA. In fact, there may be enough fragments to assemble the original full genome from this Lego set. This means the possibility of cloning the Lena horse is no longer a far-fetched dream, but a realistic goal. In collaboration with South Korea's Soam Biotech Laboratory, Russian scientists have announced that they are considering the cloning of the Lena horse. If successful, this could become the first successful de-extinction project. Our next discovery is one of the oldest and most remarkably well-preserved specimens of the Ice Age. Meet Zuher, an ancient wolf pup found in Canada in 2016. Yep, another juvenile. Zuher was discovered in the Klondike region. The locals named him Zuher, which means wolf in their language. Zuher's body is almost perfectly preserved. This pup lived only 6 to 8 weeks before tragedy struck, trapping him in an icy grave that preserved him for 57,000 years. His eyes, nose, fur, and claws appear as though he fell into an eternal sleep just yesterday. But that's far from the only reason why this find is so significant. Zuher provided scientists with a unique opportunity to learn more about the lives of ancient wolves and their environmental conditions during the Ice Age. His well-preserved fur and teeth allowed researchers to analyze his diet. Surprisingly, it was found that Zuher primarily ate fish. This was quite an unexpected discovery. No, it's not as strange as if he had been herbivorous, but still unusual. The condition of its tissues suggests it had a quick death. Most likely, the animal died due to a riverbank collapse or landslide, which buried him under layers of sediment that quickly froze, a classic permafrost preservation story. The ancient species Zooher belonged to was likely an ancestor of modern gray wolves. They hunted in packs, but could also lead solitary lives. DNA analysis confirmed that Zooher belonged to an ancient wolf lineage that no longer exists, but contributed to the genetic material of modern wolf populations. Zooher's discovery has opened new avenues for research. His genetic material can be used to study the evolution of ancient predators, and may even contribute to ambitious projects like cloning. For now, Zooher remains one of the best preserved examples of ancient Ice Age life. We've finally arrived at something you may not have expected. Until now, we've discussed attempts to revive some animals frozen for thousands of years, although only through cloning. But what about the actual resurrection from the frozen? In 2018, Russian scientists, in collaboration with researchers from Princeton University, made a startling discovery. They studied 2 samples of ancient nematodes, microscopic roundworms typically less than a millimeter in size. One sample was extracted from the icy layers of the Kolyma River, while the other was found near the Alazia River. The samples were estimated to be 42,000 and 30,000 years old, respectively. And here, the team of scientists discovered something shocking. Both nematodes, after being placed in a nutrient-rich medium, began to show signs of life. Yes, this was a true scientific sensation. These worms, frozen solid for tens of thousands of years, came back to life after thawing. This marked the first documented case of successfully reviving a multicellular organism that had been in a frozen state for such an extended period. The discovery demonstrated that life could persist much longer under extreme conditions than previously thought. Moreover, these resilient little worms opened the door to studying the limits of biological survival, which holds critical implications for astrobiology, the science of life in space. However, this story raised serious questions and concerns. What if these nematodes introduced ancient microorganisms or viruses into our modern world, potentially threatening ecosystems? This is where things take a more unsettling turn. In 2014, French scientists discovered an ancient virus buried in Siberian permafrost. They named it Pithovirus sibericum, and it was dated to be around 30,000 years old. What made this virus particularly remarkable was its size. It's one of the largest viruses ever identified. So large, it can be seen under a microscope without complex techniques. Measuring about 1.5 micrometers, it's even larger than many bacteria. For comparison, the diameter of a human hair is about 70 micrometers. The pithovirus turned out to be really unique. First, unlike most viruses, which have compact genomes, the pithovirus contains many unnecessary or non-coding DNA fragments, or junk DNA, if you will. However, dismissing these as irrelevant might be misleading, as it downplays potential threats. Second, it turns out pithovirus specializes in infecting amoebas. Using special instruments, scientists reactivated the pithovirus. We know it sounds ominous, no matter what scientists say about laboratory safety. When placed in a nutrient medium with amoebas, the virus successfully infected and replicated within them. This experiment demonstrated that ancient pathogens could remain infectious even after tens of thousands of years. While human cells are of no interest to the pithovirus, its resurrection is unsettling. The mere fact that this virus could be revived after tens of thousands of years has made scientists ponder what else might be hidden in the permafrost. The pithovirus served as a chilling reminder that permafrost can act not only as a preserver of animals, but as a time capsule for ancient pathogens. In fact, the outbreaks of anthrax in the northern regions of Russia are vivid examples of that. An unusually hot summer of 2016 melted permafrost, exposing the burial sites of livestock that had died from anthrax decades earlier. The anthrax remained active, causing an outbreak that infected dozens of people and killed thousands of reindeer. Although pithovirus turned out to be harmless, its revival reminds us of the potential dangers lurking in permafrost. If viruses that once infected animals or even humans tens of thousands of years ago were to thaw and re-emerge, they might pose significant risks to modern immune systems unprepared for such ancient adversaries. This scenario is akin to encountering an ancient enemy we once had weapons for, but have since forgotten how to make them. And it's almost certain that the pithovirus isn't the only enemy hiding beneath the ice. In 2021, an international research team drilled ice cores on the Tibetan Plateau and made a remarkable discovery: 33 distinct viruses, 28 of which were previously unknown to science. The team used sterile equipment and extremely cautious methods to avoid contaminating the samples. After all, when searching for viruses that are 15,000 years old, it's crucial to ensure they are truly ancient and not modern. The ice samples were collected from 2 locations on the Gulia Glacier at an altitude of over 6,700 meters. Here, the ice acts as a time capsule, preserving microorganisms and viruses in pristine condition. What's most fascinating about these viruses is their extraordinary adaptation to extreme conditions. Low temperatures, high levels of ultraviolet radiation, and a lack of nutrients didn't hinder their survival. Scientists believe these viruses infected ancient bacteria living on glaciers and were part of that unique ecosystem. This discovery adds to growing concerns about the melting of glaciers. While these particular viruses pose no threat to humans, who can guarantee that future discoveries will be equally harmless? The deeper we dig, the more unsettling our history seems to be. Now, instead of layers of ice, we will see tunnels of stone, sealed chambers that have preserved human history better than any museum ever could. Did you know that before being sent to Mars, the Moon, or anywhere else, landing spacecraft undergo meticulous cleansing to destroy even the slightest traces of life? It's true. Not those who arrived from there, but those sent there are the ones we clean. This might seem strange and counterintuitive, right? After all, nothing threatens us. But we are not talking about an external threat, because the threat comes from ourselves. It's simple. Scientists are trying to protect other planets, satellites, and asteroids from us. Not from humanity, but from earthly life in general. We don't want to infect, for example, Mars with terrestrial viruses, bacteria, or anything larger. After all, if we bring terrestrial microorganisms there, they can establish colonies. You might wonder, what's wrong? But how then would we distinguish between authentic Martian life and a mutated, Earth-born, quote-unquote, infection? So scientists actually have a point. But it's not only space missions that need such a careful approach. There are places on Earth that scientists try to protect just as vigilantly. These are places with closed ecosystems, isolated from the external environment for thousands of years. People often compare such places with other planets, and although this comparison has become somewhat of a cliché, just think about it for a minute. Do we have any other reference points for what life would look like on other planets, with a different atmosphere and chemical composition of the environment? These are our only reference points based on something tangible rather than hypothetical. Occasionally, our planet gives us a glimpse into unknown worlds when we can access locations that have been completely isolated for thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of years. And when scientists manage to find such a place, there are simply no words to describe what they feel. These unique places often reveal incredible secrets about humanity, and some things found there can totally change our understanding of who we are. What are these places? They are caves. Join us on our exploration of caves harboring the most fascinating finds that amazed scientists. Weird things found in caves. 1986. The historical region of Dobruja, near the city of Constanta in Romania. The authorities planned to construct a geothermal power plant in the area. For this purpose, scientists conduct preliminary geological research. As geologists dug deeper and deeper, they suddenly discovered a void. Do you think they were thrilled to death to see something unique discovered right before their eyes? Actually, they weren't surprised even one bit. This region is known for its abundance of underground caves, so uncovering another one did not impress anyone, or rather, almost no one, because one inquisitive person nonetheless decided to study the find more carefully. His name was Christian Lascu, a curious and passionate speleologist and explorer with a richly diverse background. So Christian Lascu became interested in the find and went down into the cave. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, as there are plenty of caves in Romania. But this particular cave turned out to be absolutely unique, and soon became a huge sensation. The cave was found to contain chambers that had been completely isolated from the external environment for as long as 5.5 million years. It would seem, what's so sensational about it? Sometimes it happens. However, the whole point was that life had existed and evolved independently in the cave all these millions of years, completely isolated from the external world. Skeptics might dismiss this, saying that some bacteria were just eking out a miserable existence, and they would be wrong, because dozens of complex organisms managed to survive and evolve in this closed natural terrarium. Many of these creatures have become almost unlike anything else. The early researchers witnessed firsthand that there were plenty of all sorts of floating and crawling animals in the cave. Some of them were quite large. But how is this possible? Let's break it down for you. Millions of years ago, there was an ancient oceanic sea at the site of the cave. A collision of massive underground formations caused the water to recede, leaving behind the cave. Over millennia, the cave's entrance began to seal off from the outside world. Various woody vegetation and loose soil encroached on the area, gradually covering the natural cavity's entrance. Groundwater eventually filled the cave's lower levels. This is how a natural terrarium was formed. A completely isolated environment that developed its own laws. Today, Movil Cave is a compact, stone-walled space with narrow, almost vertical vaults coated in a thick layer of clay and limestone deposits. The length of the explored dungeon does not exceed 300 meters, about 1,000 feet. At the bottom of the cave, there is a lake whose water is almost completely devoid of oxygen. Narrow horizontal passages divide the above-water gallery into 3 separate caverns. The atmosphere of the underground space contains a huge amount of methane, carbon dioxide, and almost half as much oxygen as on the surface of the Earth. The air is also saturated with hydrogen sulfide and ammonia. It might seem a little strange. What can survive in such a toxic environment? Without any exaggeration, it's highly toxic. Yet, this dark cave has become a surprisingly comfortable habitat for some unique organisms. Any intelligent person might wonder, what have they been eating all this time? After all, there was no connection to the outside world, and the cave was quite small. The answer lies in the incredible adaptability of life and the transformative power of evolution, ensuring the continuity of this wonderful thing called life. Anyone who has at least some background in biology can guess that all these creatures in the cave fed on each other for millions of years, establishing a sustainable food chain with some unique features. Let's think for a moment. What is the most basic way to explain the concept of a food chain? Predators sit at the very top, feeding on herbivores and sometimes smaller predators. Herbivores feed on whatever the plant world has to offer. And what do plants eat? Where do they get the building material for the trunks, branches, and leaves? At first glance, it may seem that it comes from the ground. After all, why does a tree need such a complex root system? But it doesn't really work this way. Not quite. Carbon is the main building material of plants, which they take out of thin air. After all, their lush crowns with dense foliage have an actual practical purpose. They use it to ensure photosynthesis, a key process in plant nutrition. And it is plants that form the foundation of the food chain. The whole chain collapses once you remove the plants, as herbivores, and by extension predators, will have nothing to eat. And what's needed for photosynthesis? That's right, sunlight. So the question is, how could complex life develop in the Movil Cave? After all, there was no sun exposure there, even an indirect one, for several million years. What formed the basis of the food chain there? Nature has taken an extremely resourceful path here. Instead of producing the necessary substances with the help of sunlight, bacteria have adapted to work with whatever resources they had as a desperate measure. In place of photosynthesis, bacteria in Movil Cave have developed chemosynthesis as the basis of life. In this nutrition method, the source of energy for the synthesis of organic substances is the oxidation reactions of inorganic compounds. Bacteria have literally adapted to use available substances like sulfur and methane, which are typically toxic or waste materials in our usual ecosystems, as their nutrient medium. This is how the food chain was formed here. It was based on the same bacteria. As they multiplied, they formed nutrient-rich films or even foams on the surfaces of underground lakes. And then, things took their predictable evolutionary course. Subsequently, it turned out that a more toxic environment, paradoxically, supported more life. Of course, some animals that found themselves in an underground trap couldn't adapt to the difficult conditions and died out. But many have evolved and adapted to the darkness and the terrible chemical cocktail in the air. This forced confinement even saved this cave community. The cave's relatively stable temperature allowed microorganisms and animals to survive even during the Ice Age. Being in total darkness for such a long time, underground creatures lost the ability to see. The eyes completely atrophied as they became redundant. The lack of heat and light also affected their external coloration. Over millions of years, almost all animals became completely colorless. Something similar can only be seen in the ocean depths, where sunlight also doesn't reach. Despite the limited color palette, the fauna of Movil Cave is astonishingly diverse. Various species of arthropods, leeches, mollusks, rotifers, and protostomes thrive in the underground environment. These are the deepest living land multicellular organisms on Earth. These primitive creatures can detect the slightest vibrations of stone faults, air masses, and water, which helps them hunt in complete darkness. Underwater fauna is completely different from its terrestrial counterpart. For example, Relict snails are a unique species of mollusks that thrive in a hydrogen sulfide atmosphere. They feed on the very same bacteria that form so-called bacterial mats, layers of nutritious organic matter. The cave is also home to water scorpions, which live in the lake and very rarely crawl to the surface. They eat crustaceans and insects. The most remarkable inhabitant of Movil Cave is the Cryptops speleorix centipede. It is also the largest predatory animal in this ecosystem. Although its body is a little more than 5 centimeters, 2 inches long, it can be considered a real monster for such a limited space. At this scale, it's actually at the top of the food chain, the local apex predator, the ruler of the ecosystem. Extensive scientific research dispelled all doubts about the centipede's uniqueness. The scientists found striking morphological and genetic differences between the cave animal and its closest terrestrial relative. Then, an international team of biologists used DNA tests and confirmed that this centipede species cannot be found anywhere else on the planet. In total, 57 species are now known to inhabit the cave, including leeches, woodlice, pseudoscorpions, the above-mentioned centipede, and much more. Of these, 37 species are endemic, meaning they are not found anywhere else on the planet. This is one of those rare occasions where people were smart enough not to disrupt anything. From the moment it became clear that the discovered cave is very unique, it started to receive special treatment. The entrance was sealed from the outside with a concrete slab, and access inside was strictly limited to researchers in sterile suits who can only go in a couple of times a year. It could be said we treat this place with the same reverence as the landing spacecraft we mentioned at the start of our story. Thus, there is hope that this island of unique, almost alien life will survive for many years to come. And now, let's travel to the other side of the world, to the island of Madagascar. Thanks to the famous cartoon, even children, more than anybody else, became familiar with this incredible island and its inhabitants. In particular, the character named Julian, the jovial and animated ring-tailed lemur, was everyone's favorite.
I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it.
Indeed, in real life, this animal also looks kind of cartoonish. But this is only one type of lemur, and in nature, there are many others. Ruffed, brown, black, golden, and mongoose lemurs, each more amusing and cuter than the last. But our story takes a sad turn here, because we'll discuss a real lemur cemetery. This creepy place was discovered by paleontologists in the southwest of Madagascar, in Simenon-Pitsotsi National Park's Avon Cave. The cave has long been filled with water, which is partially the reason why this grim place wasn't discovered until less than 10 years ago, which is quite recently. While this might have been an intriguing but not particularly sensational find, some details that you're about to learn will surely change the way you think about it. It's just phenomenal. That's exactly what researcher Lori Godfrey, a paleontologist from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, said about this discovery in a phone interview with the Washington Post. Her enthusiasm was shared by everyone involved in the discovery. A huge cache of fossils like this has never been explored before. Now that we know that it's there, it's opening up a new era in paleontological exploration, Godfrey said. You might wonder, why is everyone excited about this discovery? It turns out the bottom of Avon Cave is filled with the bones of not only lemurs, but also a diverse array of other animal species. Some are very rare, while others have been extinct for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Some of the remains scattered across the cave floor belong to an extinct giant bird from the Apiornis family, known as the elephant bird. This flightless giant resembled modern ostriches, but was even larger than the biggest African ostriches today. The tallest elephant bird reaches 3 meters, 9.8 feet. You can extrapolate the size of this bird from the size of its eggs. Scientists were incredibly lucky. 2 intact elephant bird eggs were found in the dune deposits in southern Western Australia, one in the 1930s and another in 1992. But how did they end up in Australia? A plausible theory suggests they were carried by ocean currents. It's believed they made their way to the Australian coast via the Antarctic circumpolar current. Take a look at this picture. A chicken egg, an ostrich egg, and then this huge one, an elephant bird egg. Did you think that only dinosaurs had giant eggs? This bird could easily compete with them. At the same time, the elephant bird became extinct quite recently, around 1000 AD. That's AD, not BC. The discovery of elephant bird remains in Avon Cave certainly impressed everyone. However, the majority of the bones found were those of lemurs. Not just any lemurs, but gigantic ones that also became extinct. Looking at these cute cartoon animals, it's hard to believe that their ancestors could grow as big as a gorilla, but that's exactly how big they were. There were several species of these giant lemurs, referred to by scientists as sloth lemurs, koala lemurs, and monkey lemurs. These names were given based on how much they resembled some modern animals, both in the way they probably looked and in their lifestyle. Interestingly, the fossilization process, that is, transformation into stone in the giant lemur remains, was incomplete. This indicates that the bones are relatively young and still contain some organic matter, providing scientists with additional insights and a chance to figure out what these creatures were like. Experts believe that most giant lemurs were diurnal and had larger habitats compared to modern species. For instance, Paleopropithecus ingens, known as the sloth lemur, fed on leaves and fruits, moved slowly along tree branches, and was generally less active. Because of this, scientists named him the sloth lemur. On the other hand, another extinct species, Hadropithecus stenognathus, was named monkey lemur because it was an omnivorous land animal that lived in open grasslands. A lot of similar remains of giant lemurs were discovered in the Avon Cave. As they studied them, researchers began to have more and more questions, and the answers to them were often as gloomy as the place itself. They all revolved around a few main mysteries. Why did the giant lemurs become extinct? Why did this particular cave become their cemetery? And what the hell happened here anyway? To get the answers, we had to look into an even more distant past. All of these giant lemur species were thriving when humans first arrived in Madagascar around 2,300 years ago. But things took a bad turn soon after that. The first thing that comes to mind is that the newcomers simply exterminated these animals. But is that the full story? Evidence from the spores of a fungus that thrives in the droppings of large animals suggests a rapid decline in Madagascar's megafaunal population, starting about 500 years after human arrival and continuing for the next few centuries. Many giant lemur bones show clear knife marks, almost certainly indicating death at the hands of humans. But things are not as clear as they seem to be. Surprisingly, most giant lemur remains found in Avon Cave still suggest that the animals died of natural causes. They showed no signs of damage before or after death, no traces of weapons or predator teeth, and the bones themselves are remarkably well preserved. The preservation is really incredible, says Brooklyn College anthropologist Alfred Rosenberger, director of one of the projects exploring the Avon Cave mystery. Rosenberger and his colleagues believe the remains they found date back to periods both before and after humans first arrived in Madagascar. Moreover, although the remains of the giant sloth were the cave's most significant find, they weren't the only ones found there. In addition to the mentioned elephant bird, the cave is full of other bones, including that of birds, turtles, crocodiles, rodents, and different predators. This raises another question. How did all these animals end up in this cave? Or rather, they kept ending up in this same cave because the remains belonged to animals from different eras. Does this really mean that for hundreds or even thousands of years, animals from totally different species, from birds to crocodiles, came to this cave to die? Unfortunately, we don't yet know the answer. The Avon Caves continue to guard their mystery about the astonishing, albeit recent past of Earth's animal kingdom. Let's now raise the stakes in our journey. Of course, the mysteries of the distant animal past are fascinating, but the history of humans is even more intriguing. It might seem that there is plenty of information on human history. One couldn't read and review all of it in a lifetime. However, some significant events and discoveries are often overlooked in the mainstream culture. Today, we'll try to shed light on some of them for you. And it is the caves, these natural sarcophagi, that will help us in unveiling treasures preserved for thousands of years for future explorers. First, let's go to Italy, near the town of Altamura, where in 1993, speleologists discovered yet another Neanderthal remains in the Lama Lunga cave. We say yet another because remains of these ancient relatives of Homo sapiens are not particularly scarce. However, what speleologists found in Altamura was extraordinary. For years, researchers hesitated to fully explore or attempt to remove this find. The reason being that it looked like this. The bones of a humanoid creature seemed to be embedded into the stone arches of the cave, adorned with what looked like pearls also firmly attached to the remains. It was clear from the shape of the skull that the creature was very ancient, and it wasn't Homo sapiens. Moreover, the skeleton was almost complete, which is quite rare for such finds. Not surprisingly, researchers were afraid to even step anywhere near such a paleontological treasure. Therefore, for the longest time, they could not identify the species of this creature. Only recently did they decide to extract material from the scapula for analysis. Paleoanthropologists were lucky. The sample contained DNA fragments that could be tested. The results were conclusive. They belonged to a Neanderthal, one of the oldest ever discovered. The remains of Altamura man date back to 130 to 170,000 years ago. Unlucky for him, the poor fellow either fell or went down into this cave himself, where he died of hunger or thirst. The discovery in Lama Lunga cave is interesting in its own right, particularly in how well the cave preserved the remains, as if waiting for the future discoverers 100,000 years later to explore it. However, there are other caves that reveal even more astonishing secrets about Neanderthals. And we're not just talking about the way they looked, which we already have a good understanding of, but about their way of life. What were they thinking? What kind of people were they anyway? Now, it's time to get to know them a little better. Let's go back to 1990. A young speleologist, Bruno Kowalczewski, discovers a previously unknown cave in the commune of Brunekel in the Aveyron River Valley, France. The entrance had been blocked for a long time, so it was impossible to go inside right away. But driven by youthful enthusiasm and a passion for uncovering secrets, Bruno, who was only 15 years old at the time, resolved to clear the rubble at any cost. It took him 3 whole years to do this. Many years later, in one of the interviews, he mentioned that his family, including his mother, father, and brother Alexis, were very supportive of his endeavor. After years of effort, a group of enthusiasts dug a narrow tunnel 30 meters, 98 feet long, and got inside. The width of the tunnel was almost like a rabbit hole. The Kowalczewski family did not have the funds to afford a more spacious entrance, but what they found inside would forever etch their name in the annals of history. First, Bruno, along with his friends and members of the local speleologists club, found themselves in a spacious gallery. It was evident right away that this cave was extraordinary. They quickly discovered someone's bones, distinct bear paw and claw marks on the walls, as well as some ancient bear dens. But that was just the beginning. After walking 336 meters, 1,102 feet along the corridor, the group found themselves in a spacious hall that had fragments of stalagmites and evidence of fires. They immediately realized that there were more intriguing finds here than just bear tracks. The pile of stalagmites was laid out in a fairly regular shape. As it turned out later, 399 intact stalagmites and their fragments were arranged in 2 rings, one about 6 meters, 20 feet in diameter, and another about 2 meters, 6.5 feet, standing roughly 40 centimeters, 15 inches high. Some of the debris lay horizontally, forming layers. Others stood vertically, and the remaining part was used as supports. Burnt bones were also found among them. Additionally, there were 4 more piles of stalagmites with a diameter of 0.55 to 2.6 meters, 1.8 to 8.5 feet, with 2 inside a large ring and 2 outside. If all of the nearly 399 pieces of stalagmites were lined up, their total length would be 112 meters, 367 feet, and the collective weight of this building material amounted to 2.2 metric tons. Questions immediately arose about the discovery in Brunekell Cave. What was this anyway? How old was this entire installation? Who built this? And most importantly, why? It was up to the professionals to answer these questions. The first person to enter the cave was Francois Rousseau. He was also one of the first people to conduct radiocarbon dating of a burnt bear bone. The results showed that the remains were at least 47,600 years old. However, this gave only a partial glimpse into the truth, as this age corresponds to the upper limit for the radiocarbon dating method. This test technology cannot look further into the past. This means that this bone and everything around it could be much, much older. This is why much more effort had to be made to find out the real age of the find. Unfortunately, Francois Rousseau died in 1999, which put the research on hold for a while. It wasn't until 2013 that other prominent scientists, Jacques Joubert, Sophie Verheyden, and Dominique Gentil, decided to continue Rousseau's work, receiving financial support from the French Ministry of Culture's regional department. Scientists undertook some painstaking work and published the results in the journal Nature in 2016. The uranium-thorium dating method revealed that the discovered artifacts were about 176,000 years old, and this became the first point in a series of sensational discoveries. It turned out that these structures were made by Neanderthals. What's more, further findings suggested that not just one, but a group of Neanderthals were involved in creating the stalagmite structures. This must have taken quite a long time, which means that the whole project certainly involved organized labor. Thus, the Brunekell Cave provided substantial evidence that Neanderthals mastered fire, used tools, had some construction skills, and were able to plan and act in an organized manner. But that wasn't the main point. Paolo Villa of the University of Colorado Boulder interprets the structures as sites for ritual social behavior. And this insight is far more profound and interesting than the previous one. There is nothing special about the fact that ancient people fought for survival and learned to make fire or negotiate almost anything. The true sensation lies in the fact that even in these harsh conditions, without advanced technology, Neanderthals had their minds on higher matters, because Bruniquel cave artifacts can be viewed as the oldest evidence of early Neanderthals' non-utilitarian activities. And we can't emphasize this enough. We are talking about non-utilitarian activities. Scientists believe that stalagmite rings served a religious or ceremonial function. Of course, we know for sure that ancient people had some rudimentary sense of beauty, which is evidenced, for example, by cave paintings. But the discovery in Bruniquel Cave reveals such traits existed far earlier than previously thought. And speaking of cave paintings, it seems fitting to embark on another journey to explore them further. And now we are heading to Indonesia. There too, we'll see a cave full of mysteries. But first, let me ask you a question. Has it ever surprised you that people of any race or nationality, be it Australian Aborigines or the Inuit of northern Canada, can laugh or cry? And they do it in much the same way. After all, it's clear they didn't learn from each other. This is just some food for thought, so keep this in mind, as we'll get back to it pretty soon. So now, let's travel to Sulawesi Island, Indonesia. Here, in 2018, in the Leong Tedonya Cave, scientists discovered some fascinating rock paintings. They featured a fat, purple celeb's warty pig next to stencils of human hands. At first glance, it might seem like another cave painting. There are plenty of them around the world, and Indonesia is no exception. However, there's a big twist here. Apparently, this is the oldest known piece of cave art, which dramatically predates the previously assumed timeline for the emergence of artistic expression among ancient people. At the same time, this discovery challenges the long-held belief that Europe was the earliest cradle of such artifacts. Consider this. Before this discovery, the Chauvet Cave in France, with human habitation dating back 38,000 years and rock paintings around 32,000 years old, was deemed the oldest inhabited cave. And here in Indonesia, the test revealed that the age of these paintings was at least 44,000 years. You might wonder, what's so special about that? The depiction of a pig in the cave is not the only one. A nearly complete figure of a pig is found on the cave's back wall, possibly connected to a pair of nearby palm stencils. Next to it, there are several more incomplete pig figures in varying states of preservation. If all these figures were created at the same time, it's plausible that we're looking at a piece of narrative art. The arrangement of the figures is suggestive, in our view, of a narrative composition or scene in the modern Western sense. The authors write in their study. Even if the painting remains the oldest known artwork of its kind, the authors of the study, published in Science Advances, emphasize that it's unlikely to be unique. In recent years, Sulawesi's limestone karst caves have become famous for their abundant prehistoric art. Similar images have been discovered in hundreds of caves across the region, ranging from handprint stencils to animal depictions. All this allows us to look into the long-lost world of mankind's prehistoric past and draw some startling conclusions. Griffith University archaeology professor Adam Brom, who was perhaps most involved in this research, put forth a bold theory. He suggested that the first traditions of modern cave paintings did not originate in Ice Age Europe, as long believed, but elsewhere. But this has far greater implications. Brum's discovery, as well as other examples of rock art in Indonesia, reinforces the idea that our ancestors developed the same types of abstract thinking and artistic skills independently across the globe. There is also a chance that at least some ancient artists from Europe and Asia weren't modern people. Figurative art represents a rapid leap into abstract thinking, which until now has been attributed solely to Homo sapiens. However, it appears that Neanderthals were also capable of creating complex works of art. Let's circle back to where we began our discussion about the Indonesian cave. Consider why diverse peoples, with seemingly little in common, share similar behaviors like laughing, crying, storytelling, and performing rituals. After all, if you think about it, there's no obvious reason as to why these things are universally similar. But this phenomenon is an established fact, and there's even a scientific term for it. It sounds powerful and majestic to the point of giving you goosebumps. The psychic unity of humanity. Take a moment to reflect on that. Psychic unity of mankind. This concept suggests that all humans share the same fundamental psychological, mental, and cognitive potential. So perhaps such unity is not exclusive to Homo sapiens. It's possible that our ancestors shared more in common with Neanderthals than we've previously imagined. How will this knowledge help us modern people? If we all take a moment to at least think about this, perhaps there will be more unity in the world, even if just on the level of psyche. After all, we need to start somewhere. Now, let's shift our focus back from philosophical remarks to more tangible things. What else can caves tell us about humanity's past? Well, a lot of things. For example, the dietary habits of our distant ancestors. But seriously, what image springs to mind when you think about what people ate 100,000 years ago? Someone might think of a hairy and bearded creature in animal skin gnawing on a bone. And they would be right. Another would picture an equally primitive creature who is already collecting roots, and they would be right too. Today, we are going to show you a real example of what ancient people ate as far back as 170,000 years ago. Get ready to discover what the paleo diet really looked like. In 2016, a research team led by Lynn Wadley of the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa discovered charcoal fragments in the local border cave, which caught the scientists' attention. This ancient human site contained deep layers of fire ash. These fragments were quite ancient, dating back about 170,000 years. It took years of study before researchers found that these fragments were nothing more than the charred roots of a plant from the Hypoxis genus. Before this, seeds of root crops were also found in more ancient human sites in Israel. But evidence of the roasting of the fruits themselves was a groundbreaking discovery made by Wadley's team. The rhizomes of the Hypoxis plants can be as rich in carbohydrates as potatoes, although they taste more like a yam, explains Wadley. The abundance of rhizome fragments suggests that roasted root vegetables were a common part of ancient people's diet. This finding challenges the popular belief that early humans ate a lot of meat. Most versions of the paleo diet, which is supposedly based on ancestral eating habits, advise avoiding potatoes and grains. It seems like we've debunked some myths today. Dr. Wadley herself says, "I'm afraid the paleo diet is really a misnomer. Our understanding of what early humans ate may be distorted because plant remains are much less likely to be preserved than animal bones. For the same reason, most of the time, researchers don't even start looking for them. This is how we get another survivorship bias. However, vegetables can indeed survive and reach us after millennia, even if only in the form of fossils or pieces of charcoal. This is how we get rare but valuable insights into our ancestors' diets. As for what they drank, the picture is less clear. But really, what did ancient people prefer to drink? We mean besides the obvious options of regular water and milk. Perhaps they brewed some herbal tea, much like modern humans do, and enjoyed it while gazing at the stars outside their caves. Or maybe they liked to indulge in something stronger. To understand this, we need to travel closer to our own time than we previously did in the video. Once again, caves will be our guides in uncovering these ancient secrets. The earliest archaeological evidence of advanced wine fermentation techniques has been discovered in various places in Eurasia. However, ancient China is the absolute record holder in this regard. It was here that researchers found evidence of a fermented drink based on a mixture of grapes and rice, which dates back to around 7000 BC. And then there were many more similar finds. Georgia, 6000 BC. West Azerbaijan province in Iran, 5000 BC. Greece, 4500 BC. Sicily, 4000 BC. Hold on, shouldn't we stop here and learn more details? Until recently, it was believed that Italian winemaking began around 1200 BC. But a few years ago, researchers discovered traces of what may be the world's oldest wine at the bottom of terracotta jugs in a Sicilian cave. This find effectively pushed back the history of Italian winemaking by several thousand years. You might wonder, what's so special about this? Well, at least the Italians got an extra reason to be proud. And by the way, this is quite a serious issue for these people. The discovery fills us with joy, said Alessio Planeta, a prominent Italian wine expert and historian. Before this, we used to think Sicily's wine culture arrived with the island's colonization by the ancient Greeks. So you never know what surprise waits for you in the next cave, and if it would become a factor of national pride. By the way, so far we've only talked about the wine itself, the finished product. But if you'd like to see the oldest place in the world where wine was made, we would have to go to Armenia. It is there that the oldest known winery in the world was discovered. As you have probably guessed, it was also in a cave. This place is located near the village of Areni. There, archaeologists discovered a wine press for extracting grape juice, vessels for fermenting and storing wine, drinking cups, as well as dried grapevines, skins, and seeds. This is the earliest and most reliable evidence of wine production. Archaeologically speaking, for the first time ever, we have a complete picture of wine production dating back 6,100 years, said Gregory Areshian, an Armenian-American archaeologist and professor at the American University of Armenia. Prehistoric winemaking equipment was first discovered in 2007 during excavations in the Areni 1 cave complex, led jointly by Areshian and another Armenian archaeologist, Boris Gasparian. In September 2010, archaeologists completed the excavation of a large vat, 60 centimeters, 2 feet deep, buried next to a shallow 1 meter, 3.5 feet long tank made of hard clay. According to Professor Areshian, this type of design suggests that Copper Age winemakers used the most classic technique of grape crushing, that is, by stomping grapes. The juice from the crushed grapes flowed into the vat for fermentation. The finished product was then stored in jugs. The cave's cool, dry conditions made it an ideal wine cellar. By the way, this cave surprisingly brought another record-breaking relic discovery. Researchers literally didn't have to go that far to find it. Here, among sheep manure, they discovered an amazingly well-preserved shoe. Though only a single shoe was found, its condition was extraordinary. It soon became clear that these were the oldest known closed-toe leather shoes in the world. Radiocarbon method dates this unique specimen to approximately 3,500 BC, coinciding with the Copper Age era of the other artifacts found in the cave. Finding shoes from this period is incredibly rare, as leather and plant materials usually degrade very quickly. But in the case of Areni 1 cave, the contents of the pit were sealed with several layers of sheep dung. Therefore, even after people left this site, the shoe was effectively preserved for thousands of years. Even the shoe's moccasin-like design was perfectly preserved, as it was stuffed with grass. Why was it stuffed is a whole different question. Perhaps the grass served as some kind of improvised insulation. Alternatively, people of the Copper Age could have used this method to ensure that shoes retained their shape during storage. This would mean that regular hay was the prototype of modern shoe trees. This was how the cave has broken another record. Previously, the oldest known closed-toe shoes were those of Ötzi, the Iceman found in the Austrian Alps in 1991, and dating back about 5,300 years. The Armenian cave moccasin turned out to be several hundred years older, and its state of preservation is incomparable. Here's what's left of Ötzi's boot. In contrast, one could practically slip on the Areni cave moccasin and use it even today. These finds are about life, familiar things, and a quiet, everyday existence. But ahead lies a layer of the past that preserves not daily reality, but fear and despair. Beneath the asphalt of Los Angeles lies more than just a network of pipes and cables. There are bones, frozen screams, cursed animals caught in a deadly trap. Once, mammoths roamed these lands, saber-toothed cats stalked their prey, and early humans hunted for food, and many of them met the same fate. The tar at La Brea remembers everything. It swallowed millions of creatures and preserved their remains as priceless relics. For thousands of years, La Brea remained silent, but now it's revealing what has been hiding for so long. Today, it will finally share its most chilling secrets. What kind of life can survive without light, water, and oxygen? How are scientists resurrecting wolves from ancient legends? And is it possible to solve a murder committed 10,000 years ago? All this and more in today's video. The creepiest graveyard of Los Angeles. At first, the La Brea tar pits were just a source of bitumen. Native peoples even used this material for sealing boats. By the 19th century, the material was already widely applied in construction, as well as for roofing and road repairs. But everything changed in 1875 when geologists noticed bones trapped in the tar. The first articles about these finds appeared, sparking lively discussions in scientific circles. A few decades later, in 1901, geologist William Orcutt discovered the skull of a saber-toothed tiger and other remains here. It became clear La Brea was a treasure trove of scientific discoveries. At one point, school children were doing their first training excavations, and in 1912, the University of California launched large-scale research. Over the next 3 years, scientists excavated 96 pits and recovered over 750,000 fossil specimens of plants and animals. The pits where excavations took place were called quarries and were numbered for convenience. Today, the site is home to Hancock Park and the George C. Page Museum. Every year, more than 400,000 visitors come to see with their own eyes what the world of Southern California looked like 50,000 years ago. So, what is it hiding inside? Well, the discovery in quarry number 10 is one of the most remarkable. In 1914, workers stumbled upon human remains there. A skull, jawbone, and several other bones were unearthed. A true sensation. This was the first, and to this day, the only human remains found in the La Brea pits. Radiocarbon dating revealed that the remains belonged to a young woman between 18 and 25 years old. She died about 10,000 years ago, during an era when mastodons still roamed the earth. She was of small stature, about 4 feet 8 inches tall, The skull also preserved teeth, which allowed scientists to examine the enamel's microstructure, essentially the types of foods she regularly chewed. Tiny scratches and indentations were found on the teeth, the kind that appear from stone-ground flour. What did this mean? Most likely, the woman lived in a community that knew how to process grain, grinding it with a cornstone. Yes, 10,000 years ago, people lived in what is now Los Angeles, and it seems they processed far more advanced technologies than one might expect from that era. But what kind of tribe could it be? There are no definitive answers. Yet, judging by the age of the find and the shape of the skull, some anthropologists suggested that she may have been a woman of the Chumash people. Thousands of years ago, they lived in Southern California. Their settlements stretched from the Malibu coast to Santa Barbara and the northern Channel Islands. They had their own system of exchange and trade, using shells as currency. According to official records, their modern population is around 2,000, but 10,000 years ago, it may have reached as many as 10,000. Even more fascinating is that the Chumash were seafarers who built an engineering marvel of their time, the Tamil canoe. These boats were crafted from sturdy planks of redwood or pine, bound with plant fibers, and generously coated with bitumen for waterproofing. They used these boats to navigate the Pacific waters along the Southern California coast and the Channel Islands. But one mystery remains. How did the La Brea woman die? The first thought is an accident. Perhaps she slipped, fell into the sticky bitumen, and couldn't escape. But no, a piece of bone is missing from the upper part of her skull. This means she may have died from blunt force trauma. Yes, this can be a murder case. Interestingly, dog bones were also found at the same place. For some time, scientists thought the dog might have belonged to the woman, but new research in 2020 showed the animal had fallen into the tar roughly 7,000 years later. So there was no connection between them, though that only added to the story's mystery. But La Brea has always been full of surprises, and the deeper researchers dug into the pits, the more spectacular the discoveries became. One of the most astonishing finds in the tar pits turned out to be a mammoth. Its remains had lain underground for about 37,000 years and were almost completely preserved. And what's more, they were discovered completely by chance. In 2006, while building an underground parking garage for the Los Angeles County Museum of Art near the tar pits, workers struck something hard with an excavator bucket. It turned out to be a mammoth skull. Excavations began almost immediately. Numerous archaeological treasures were uncovered at the site. Skeletons of ancient animals, fragments of trees, turtles, snails, and even ground squirrels. To preserve delicate remains and continue research in laboratory conditions, they employed a clever method. Blocks of soil containing fossils were cut out and transported to the museum in large crates. The usual research routine followed. The mammoth's bones and skull were carefully cleaned by hand with brushes to remove dirt and tar. Some elements were then restored using thin Japanese paper and glue. The finds included the skull, ribs, part of the pelvis, and most of the mammoth's limbs. Only one hind leg and part of the spine were missing. The upper portion of the skull had been damaged by construction equipment during the discovery. But the most astonishing part was that both tusks, each about 10 feet long, were preserved. That is an extraordinary rarity. Tusks are composed of dentin, which is more fragile than bone, making such finds extremely uncommon. In this case, however, the tar acted as a perfect preservation medium. The discovery caused great excitement. It's worth noting that 34 mammoth remains had already been found near the La Brea tar pits. But those were fragments, sets of bones from different individuals with no complete skeleton. Zed's skeleton, by contrast, was roughly 80% intact. The giant was named Zed. Why? Quite logically, Zed became something like the final letter of the alphabet among mammoth discoveries, a kind of ideal, the rarest and most complete specimen one could ever hope for. Analysis revealed that Zed was about 48 years old at the time of his death. He hadn't yet reached the species' maximum lifespan, as mammoths could live up to 60 years. His ribs bore signs of old fractures that had healed over time. Perhaps they were wounds from battles with other males, or maybe Zed was simply a bit clumsy. As for his death, the likeliest scenario is that the mammoth went to a stream to drink, failed to notice the treacherous trap, stuck, and died from exhaustion or suffocation. Today, Zed is the star of the Page Museum at the La Brea Tar Pits, displayed at the very center of the exhibition. And here's another animal that, if not for La Brea, would have remained shrouded in mystery: the saber-toothed cat. Over 130,000 fragments from more than 2,000 Smilodons have been found in the tar pits. Why so many? Because the sticky tar pits acted as a double trap. Herbivores would get bogged down in the viscous pools and slowly sink, making sounds and emitting scents that attracted predators. But as they ventured closer, they too were trapped and ultimately died alongside their potential prey. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Smilodon was often called the saber-toothed tiger, or even the saber-toothed lion. At the time, scientists were guided mainly by its appearance, a large predator with enormous fangs. But with the discoveries at La Brea and more detailed research, it became clear that Smilodon belonged to the Machaerodontaceae subfamily. The thing is that feline skeletons are lighter and more flexible, with distinctive skull structures and cutting molars, jaw kinematics, and retractable claws. Still, you wouldn't want to meet one of these kitties in the woods. Even the smallest species, Gracilis, weighed up to 220 pounds, while the larger Smilodon fatalis reached up to 620 pounds. What's more, its shoulder height could reach 39 inches. If one of these beasts stood on its hind legs and put its forepaws on your shoulder, it would tower well above you. A truly formidable beast. Saber-toothed cats lived 2,500,000 to 10,000 years ago and roamed across North and South America. Smilodons hunted bison, horses, camels, giant ground sloths, and even young mammoths. Fossil evidence also suggests that Smilodons were unlikely to have been solitary. Some bones discovered at La Brea show healed fractures, meaning injured cats must have been cared for by others. And the sheer number of predators caught in the tar simultaneously hints at social behavior. They may have lived more like lions. In small but tight-knit groups, they would ambush prey together and strike suddenly from cover, using their powerful paws to hold it down and deliver precise, lethal bites with their long fangs. In short, this was an animal that inspired fear. But the next predators to be found at La Brea were no less terrifying. And here's another symbol of La Brea: the dire wolves. Yes, the very same fearsome beasts from Game of Thrones and other fantasy stories. But they aren't fiction. Around 10,000 years ago, dire wolves really walked the earth. Their bones have been found across the entire continent, from deserts and grasslands to forests and mountain regions. But it was at La Brea where a record number of remains were uncovered. Over 4,000 individuals. Why so many? The answer is simple and obvious to us now. Dire wolves hunted in packs. First, they would spot an animal trapped in the tar, which looked like an easy meal to them. Several wolves would approach the struggling prey, only to get stuck themselves. Then their pack instinct kicked in, and more of them joined, until the whole pack was lost in the pit. In other words, if the whole pack went out to hunt, they all ended up caught together. Thanks to these remains, scientists have been able to trace the evolution and lifestyle of dire wolves. It turned out they lived from about 125,000 to 9,500 years ago. They were larger than modern wolves, with a more massive head and more powerful jaws. Their skulls were broader, and their bite force far surpassed that of any living wolf. On average, they weighed between 132 and 150 pounds, though it's estimated that some giants reached up to 240 pounds. Their body length was also impressive, almost 5 feet from nose to tail. Of course, their prey was also large. Their main diet included bison and ancient horses, and sometimes even sloths. No, not the ones you're thinking of. But more on that later. And yes, these wolves faced a problem similar to every stray dog: broken teeth. This shows that they often had to gnaw bones clean, scraping out every last bit of food under intense competition. For a long time, people thought dire wolves were simply bigger wolves of the past, but in fact, they weren't direct ancestors of today's wolves at all. They were a separate, extinct evolutionary branch. That's why they were placed in their own genus, Anocion. By the way, you may recall the sensational news that scientists resurrected dire wolves. Colossal Biosciences bred 3 puppies named Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi. They edited 20 genes in their DNA to make them resemble dire wolves. But these are not ancient predators. They're genetically modified gray wolves. The company didn't bring back dire wolves, but rather created genetically altered gray wolves. Today, the museum holds more than 3.5 million specimens. But dire wolves occupy a special place here. Around 400 skulls are displayed together in a massive installation known as the Dire Wolf Wall. It's a powerful reminder of the hundreds of packs that once roamed the plains of Los Angeles. And here's another astonishing creature whose remains were found in tar: the sloth. But not the familiar little tree dweller we know today. No, ancient sloths were true giants. Some species were so large they could rival modern Indian elephants. For example, one of the largest, Eremotherium, weighed up to 9,000 pounds and stretched nearly 20 feet long. To put this into perspective, a person of average height standing next to it would look like a schoolchild beside a bus. However, such giants were not found in the La Brea tar pits. In this region, scientists most often encountered Harlan's ground sloth. This species was somewhat smaller than its relatives, reaching over 10 feet tall and weighing around 2,500 pounds. Still, it would be hard to call that small. Its size was comparable to that of a large modern bear. Studying the bones revealed many details. Ground sloths had broad pelvises, sturdy limbs, and powerful claws, which they used for both defense and foraging in trees. When rising up on their hind legs, they would brace themselves with their tail, forming a stable tripod. And yes, they were herbivores. What's more, unlike modern sloths, their ancient relatives may have lived in groups. Ground sloths roamed what is now Los Angeles during the late Pleistocene, roughly from 100,000 to 11,000 years ago. There is a claim that some survived until the 16th century, based on the writings of French traveler André de Tavay, who described similar animals. However, this hypothesis lacks scientific support. Most likely, the traveler saw ordinary sloths, and his account later inspired illustrators to depict giants. But why did these giants go extinct? Around 11,000 to 10,000 years ago, North America experienced a major environmental filter that affected many species. We've already mentioned this in our earlier videos. During this time, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant beavers, horses, and camels disappeared from the continent. Along with them, the ground sloths also vanished. The culprit was climate change. Glaciers retreated, and it became drier and warmer, and vegetation shifted. Large herbivores had more difficulty finding food. And there was another factor. By this time, the first human settlers had already arrived in the Americas. They hunted actively, and a slow-moving ground sloth would have been an easy target. But there was another animal capable of bringing them down. And it was jaguar Panthera onca augusta. At first glance, it might not seem too impressive. After all, jaguars still roam South America today, but this one was in a completely different league. A modern jaguar typically weighs around 170 pounds, while its Pleistocene relative reached 234 to 284 pounds. This species was discovered in Nebraska back in the 19th century, when scientists unearthed a jaw fragment and a tooth. At the time, they had no idea they had found one of the largest cats ever to roam the continent. More discoveries followed in Florida, Oregon, Tennessee, and of course, in the La Brea tar pits. It's easy to guess that the site became a real trap for this predator. The giant jaguar lived during the Ice Age, a legendary time when mammoths, camels, and massive ground sloths lived in North America. In other words, the predator's table was always set, but as large herbivores began to disappear, so did this jaguar, simply because it was too big to survive on small prey. It needed substantial game to sustain itself. Its anatomy suggests it could subdue prey far exceeding its own mass, which raises an interesting question. If it had survived to the present day, could it compete with tigers? Or perhaps it might have become the king of the jungle. Yes, alongside such enormous and powerful creatures from the La Brea pits, other smaller finds may almost fade into the background. Specifically, small beetles. Thousands of tiny fossils have been found in the La Brea tar pits. Over 180 of these specimens have been carefully studied. Scientists identified 7 species of ground beetles and darkling beetles that were especially well preserved. Among them were desert darkling beetles of the genus Eleodes, adapted to arid conditions, as well as Cicindela hemorrhagica and Cicindela oregana ground beetles. All of these species can still be found today in the open landscapes of Southern California. These beetles may be tiny, ranging from 0.2 to 0.8 inches, but their scientific value is enormous. Radiocarbon dating shows that these species lived here during 3 periods: 28,000 to 50,000. 7,500 to 16,000, and around 4,000 years ago. Their nearly continuous presence indicates that the area's climate remained relatively stable, except for a brief cooling period during the glacial maximum. Once that ended, the beetles returned. If this land had ever been covered by humid forests, insects adapted to such environments would also have been preserved in the tar, but none have been found, clearly showing that such forests never existed here. Today, at the George C. Page Museum, you can see these tiny insects next to the massive bones of mastodons. And yet, even the beetles look enormous compared to the next discovery. Because unique bacteria have also been discovered in the La Brea tar pits. You might think, so what? Bacteria are everywhere. But these ones are special. They are more than 28,000 years old, and somehow they managed to survive all that time in tar. Scientists identified over 200 species of microorganisms here. Many of them belong to entirely new families never seen before. One of them even turned out to be related to radiation-resistant bacteria of the genus Deinococcus. Just so you know, these microbes can withstand radiation levels that would kill almost any other form of life, thanks to a unique DNA repair mechanism. They literally stitch shattered fragments of their DNA back into a functioning genome. Other bacteria discovered in the tar turned out to be true masters of adaptation. They can survive in conditions that seem utterly inhospitable to life, with almost no water and little oxygen. Even more remarkably, they were found to have 3 entirely new classes of enzymes capable of breaking down petroleum products. In other words, they literally feed on what is a deadly poison to most other living things. But the most fascinating part is that such properties can actually be used for the benefit of the entire planet. For example, we can apply them in bioremediation to clean up oil spills, to create alternative fuels, and perhaps even to develop new medicines. But how did scientists even realize that there was life in the La Brea tar? The clue lay in the bubbles rising from the very bottom of the pits, nothing less than methane. And it is produced by special methanogenic bacteria and archaea. Instead of oxygen, they use carbon dioxide and release methane as a byproduct of their life. Thus, its presence was proof that microbial activity was thriving inside the tar. Scientists then collected a sample. To study the bacteria, they froze the tar with liquid nitrogen and ground it into powder. Then they extracted DNA from it and used it to reconstruct the genetic profiles of the ancient microbes. But that was only the beginning. Further studies will focus on specific enzymes that could be used to benefit our planet. In a way, Brea can be seen as a secret incubator, a place where life managed to persist for tens of thousands of years under the most extreme conditions. But the La Brea pits also yielded another key to unlocking the climate history of Los Angeles: fossilized remains of plants and seeds. Researchers identified about 158 species of plants preserved in the tar pits, including fragments of wood, seeds, cones, leaves, and even pollen. All of these once grew in the Los Angeles territory about 50,000 years ago. Among the various seeds, scientists struggled for a long time to identify one particular type found in the tar. At first, they thought it belonged to some long-extinct, unknown plant, but microscopy revealed that it was actually Rocky Mountain juniper, a species that no longer grows in California today. Even more surprising, the pits also contained seeds of California juniper. These two species practically never occur together. It's almost like finding a palm tree and a sequoia side by side in nature. They belong to entirely different climate zones. So how did they meet? The answer lies in the last glacial maximum, about 26,000 to 19,000 years ago. During this cold period, Rocky Mountain junipers grew in the La Brea region, but forests didn't fully cover the land because the CO2 levels were extremely low, around 180 ppm. Such low levels barely supported photosynthesis, and plants suffered from carbon deficiency. This was part of the overall dynamics of the last glacial period, when cold oceans absorbed large amounts of CO2 and carbon was trapped in glaciers and permafrost. Today, things are very different. As the glaciers began to melt, the oceans warmed and released much of that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Ocean currents and wind patterns shifted. Los Angeles transformed from a cool, damp region into a warm and drier one, and drought-resistant California juniper replaced the Rocky Mountain species. Around 13,000 years ago, both species vanished completely from Los Angeles. Most likely, this was due to wildfires and climate change. The Rocky Mountain juniper disappeared because the surroundings became too hot, while the California juniper faded away as the climate became more temperate. Their traces remain only in the tar pits.